Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to our live talk show, Downright Capable, Changing the Way Others View Down Syndrome. I just wanted to preface this with saying that I have a cold, so if you see me drinking a lot or grabbing a cough drop, I'm okay. So anyway, I just want to thank everybody for being here today. This is our third show. And if you haven't had a chance to catch our first two shows, they're still available here on our Facebook page. And we are actually really excited to share that those two shows collectively have over 3,000 views.
That's a lot of views, Marla.
A lot of views. So like we're talking about, we're obviously talking about something that people want to listen to. So
Absolutely.
So on today's show, we're going to be talking about two topics that some of you might currently be going through right at this time. I know I am, and Brian, I think you are as well.
Yeah.
And that is FBAs, Functional Behavior Assessments, and BIPs, Behavior Intervention Plans. So this is going to be an informative show. But before we get started, let me welcome our replay viewers. If you're watching this on the replay, please know that you can still comment and you can share this video with others. And I would like to suggest that you stay with us until the end of the show because, as always, we have some really great resources that we want to share with you. So, Brian, ready to get started?
I'm ready. Are you?
I am. So can you share with our viewers what a functional behavior assessment is?
Absolutely. So, I kind of appreciated what Marla did when she started with the FBA and the BIP. I know we all have this special education alphabet soup that we all have to deal with. But a functional behavioral assessment, often known as an FBA, is a process that identifies specific target behaviors, the purpose of the behavior, and maybe those factors that maintain the behavior that's interfering with the student's educational progress. So I think there's a few things that an FBA, my understanding is that an FBA should do. First of all, it needs to define the problem. What's going on? What's the problem? Why is this an issue? Then there needs to be a plan to collect the data. The data should be collected from a variety of times throughout the day and a variety of settings and locations. So I talked about the alphabet soup of data. You also collect ABC data. Yeah. And so we have the A is the antecedent. So what is happening just before that behavior? The B is the behavior. What is the behavior? Without judgment, what is going on? And then C, the consequence. What did the child get as a result of that behavior? Once you've collected the data, you need to compare and analyze that data. You need to formulate a hypothesis for why that behavior is occurring. And then it's important to develop and implement a behavior intervention plan to address the behavior, and then, of course, monitor that behavior along the way. So we've talked about that FBA part. Now let's talk a little bit about the BIP part, the behavior intervention plan. It's a plan that is used to teach students the necessary tools for changing their behavior and using the behavior to successfully get their needs met in appropriate ways. Basically, we want to eliminate the unwanted behavior and increase the desired behaviors. So I hope that all makes sense. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to comment below, or if you're watching this on replay, please don't hesitate to ask. We do want to make sure that parents understand this to the best that we can communicate. There's a couple of other things that I wanted to talk about with FBAs and BIPs. First of all, I'm not an attorney, and I may have some misconceptions about how all this works. So please, if you are an attorney or you know an attorney or you've been through this and have more legal knowledge than us, please correct us if we
chime in below.
Down below.
Parents going through the motions, walking the walk. So.
Absolutely. So if for some reason we say something that's a little off, just let us know and we'll make sure to correct that. But when we look at IDEA, IDEA requires an FBA only when a child with a disability is removed from that child's current placement under the following circumstances. So first of all, if a child has violated school conduct policy that requires removal for 10 days or more, if that misconduct is determined to be a manifestation of the child's disability, if the misconduct is determined not to be a manifestation of the child's disability, or if the misconduct is in serious violation of school policy, such as drugs, weapons, serious bodily harm. So that's where the law actually speaks directly to FBAs. I think sometimes, and I know Marla, you probably do, and I know there's lots of other parents do, we get a little bit confused because the law also talks about behavior that impedes the child's learning or the learning of others.
Right.
Well, actually, Marla, and I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but the law doesn't actually talk about FBAs in that particular paragraph. It does talk about how the IEP team must consider the use of positive behavior interventions and supports and other strategies to address that behavior. Naturally, we would believe that an FBA would be a part of that process. And I think that's where sometimes maybe a district might offer some pushback to us as parents because it's not specifically addressed in that part of the law.
Right.
But best practice would tell us that the FBA should be done in order to determine what those behaviors are so we can create an effective behavior intervention plan.
Right, because to your point, I don't know how you can create a plan that's supposed to help the child if you don't have any data to support what's been happening or what, the ABCs, the antecedent, So absolutely. I think that's important that a lot of people ask that. Can we just have a behavior plan? I mean, I'm sure you probably could, but one, is it going to be effective? And then the other thing is, you really want to make sure that behavior plan is written into the IEP.
It is, yes, absolutely. Because if it's not in the IEP, it doesn't technically have to be done. And then sometimes we as parents come back and are frustrated because things aren't being done that we thought should have been done. And it wasn't written in the IEP, so it doesn't have to be done. Now, there are a couple of things I want to point out that with an FBA, because the law is kind of vague on that, states have a little bit of leeway in determining what that might look like. So I know here in Arkansas, where I live, the state has gone above and beyond IDEA and has added the wording that says that in the case of a child whose behavior impedes his or her learning or that of others, to consider the use of positive behavior interventions and supports. And it goes on to say such consideration may include the need to conduct a functional behavior assessment of the child and develop a behavior intervention plan to address those needs. Mm-hmm. Now, I know in Massachusetts, Marla, where you live, the state has not added to the federal law regarding FBAs.
Correct.
So that's important for parents, if you're listening or when you do listen to this, to make sure you understand exactly what your state says about that. And Marla, I think we'll have a document later that will let parents know if their state has added to that part of the law or if they're just going along with the federal law there.
Yeah, we have a nice resource that we want to share because like Brian said, I mean, it is important to know what each state is doing. So
absolutely.
That's incumbent upon the parents to actually look into, especially if you're going to start going down the road of an FBA or BIP. You really need to know how your state views those.
Absolutely. Or if you've moved states, I know we'll talk about it here at the end of our show. We have a guest coming up that has recently moved. I've recently moved and to a new state, and sometimes you have to navigate new rules, regulations, new interpretations of the law.
Right.
And sometimes that goes into just even defining what that looks like because there's no real federal definition of what an FBA looks like. Mm-hmm. Now, it's important to know also that when a district offers an FBA or a parent requests an FBA, this is an assessment of your child, and it requires signed parent consent for this. So they have, I think, 60 days to complete that process. And you as parents should be an integral part of that process to be able to make informed decisions. So I know, Marla, I have shared a lot of information here, and it's pretty technical, and it might be a little bit confusing. Maybe we can get practical and start sharing a little bit of a personal story. Do you have one to share?
I sure do. And thank you, Brian, because although that was a lot of technical information, I hope that, people will replay this a few times just to really sit down and grasp what it is that we're talking about. And we do strongly suggest that you utilize some of the resources that we are providing for you, because it is important information. So for us, my son Jacob has transitioned into the 6th grade. And one of the issues that we have been dealing with, Jacob did have a FBA done last year at his prior school. And he does have a BIP, behavior intervention plan, currently as well. So one of the issues that we're dealing with right now is that Jacob is struggling getting off the bus in the morning. And, I talked to him and I talked to the teachers. And, the antecedent that you were talking about, Brian, when I asked my son, I said, why are you having a difficult time getting off the bus? What's the problem? He said, Mommy, too loud. And I said, Jacob, is the bus too loud? And he said, no, school. So again, when you start asking questions and you start digging in, I found out that the kids get off the bus and they go into the gym, which of course is extremely loud. Right. So I've now dug into why he's having an issue, why he's scared. His anxiety is so high because he doesn't want to go in that gym. It's too loud. Right. So, they always come back and, did he have a good night's sleep? Is he feeling sick? So it's always, they come back to us, which is fine. And they should ask those questions. But then as a parent, you need to go back and say, well, you walk me through the morning routine. You let me know what happens after he gets off that bus, because that may play an integral role on why he doesn't want to get off. So, we figured out, and I did talk to our BCBA, and he actually did observe one time. He observed Jacob on the bus. And, again, really, there was no behaviors on the bus. There was no issues on the bus. It was just getting into school and not wanting to get off that bus. So we came to an agreement, although I still think there should be more data, and I think we're going to talk about that. But that, maybe he doesn't go to the gym, that he goes right to his homeroom. And, that was something that the new BCBA wrote into his behavior plan. But again, in reading it, it doesn't say where Jacob goes. It just says that he gets off the bus. Right. Well, that's kind of a moot point, because anybody reading that would just do the typical thing and bring him into the gym. Right. So, it really has to take a lot of time on us as parents, and what I want to understand is, the plan itself. Is the plan even working? And we're going to have a different format here. I'm going to be a parent who's kind of asking Brian a whole bunch of questions. So, Brian, are you ready? I'm going to do this rapid fire, asking you a bunch of questions here.
I am. Absolutely. Shoot away.
All right. So, Brian, do you think going back to the BCBA, which, let me clarify, BCBA is the behavior, oh my gosh, what does it even mean, Brian? Behavior counts, I don't even know what it means. Board certified behavior analysis.
There you go.
All different acronyms here. So a BCBA, board certified behavior analysis. So do you think that going back to the BCBA and asking what data do you have that this BIP, his behavior plan, even works? And the reason that I want to ask that is because in my last consult, which was a couple of days ago with my special education teacher, we had a conversation about the plan, the behavior plan. And I come to find out that she's even having a difficult time understanding it. It's so cumbersome. So my question is, well, how are you even implementing it if you don't even understand it? So I think it's worthwhile to go back to the BCBA and, saying, how are we implementing this? If it's not being done with fidelity, it's not going to be successful. Do you agree that it would be incumbent upon a parent to go back and say, what data do you have?
Absolutely, Marla. And I want to go back to one thing you said at one point with Jacob getting off the bus. We have to always remember behavior is communication. And sometimes our kids can't quite communicate or don't know how to communicate what it is that's bothering them. And so going back to even what I said about the law, it's important to figure out why the behavior is occurring so that we can then develop an effective plan to address it. So, he was trying to tell his teachers that he didn't like the gym. He didn't like the noise.
Right.
And so I'm so glad you pointed that out. Now, to answer your question, Marla, I think it is important. You talked about how the teacher felt a little bit overwhelmed with the amount of information in that plan. And it seems like to me that there's way too much in the plan. If you, as the parent, if the teacher, if the people who work with your son feel like there's too much in there, there's no way that plan's going to be implemented with fidelity. Correct. Really and truly, a behavior and intervention plan and an FBA, well, an FBA is going to look at, just going to gather data, but a behavior intervention plan should really only address a couple of goals here and be really specific about what the undesirable behavior is and about what they're going to do to correct that and to help the child engage in desirable behavior. And if it's too cumbersome, it's not going to be implemented with fidelity. And the data that you're asking about, there's no way to collect data on so many different aspects if that plan is too much. It's too much.
Right. I agree. And it's actually, here it is. I want to show you guys.
Yeah.
So it's a live document. But I mean, I think that's, to your point about, there should be, we think 3 goals that should be on that behavior plan. Because like we said, it's way too much. But I think once you even get into whatever that first or second, even underneath that, there's just so many things, so many steps that, this child has to do to be successful at that goal.
Right.
They're just going to be like, I give up.
We all feel that way, right?
And a prime example is the teachers going, I don't even know how to do this because this clearly is providing him the anxiety. And, so, it's, I don't know if there's when it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And you need to go back to your IEP team and say, look, we're making some changes to BIP. Yeah. But, my next question for you, Brian, you ready?
I'm ready. Yep.
So do you feel that the IEP team should provide data on my child's BIP when they are discussing progress on his academic goals? Because the BIP is written in the IEP. So who's keeping track of that data and how often can we see that data?
That's a great question, Marla. And, you talked about the data in your previous question, gathering data. It's hard to gather data, excuse me, if the plan's too cumbersome. But even if the plan is appropriate for your child, there should be data that's being collected to determine whether or not that maladaptive behavior is decreasing and the desired behavior is increasing. That's what we want to see. Now, because an FBA is a formal assessment and it is done in order to create that behavior intervention plan, that behavior intervention plan should have some goals attached to it. Those goals are part of the IEP. So my understanding is that you, Marla, or anyone out there, and I know, like you said, I'm going through this as well. We have our meeting next week, but those goals should be reported to you as the parent at least as often as every other child in that school gets report cards of some sort. So my school, we have 4 quarters a year. So my kids get 4 report cards a year. So I should get 4 reporting periods at a minimum for those IEP goals. Now, what if, thinking about behavior, that's a little bit more of a concern than maybe their reading skills or their writing skills or math skills. I know from my own son, I get a daily report from my son's teachers, and it's just kind of his little chart. He's got smiley faces and sad faces, which I think we're ready to move on from that, but that's a different story.
Same here. Mars.
Yeah, we get a daily report though to let us know how his day went, so that if there is a behavior that I or my wife feels we need to address with him, we can in that moment. if you're waiting till we just had our first quarter, finish up. I know, Marla, you're getting ready to.
Right.
If you're waiting until that first quarter to sit down and say, well, here's all the data that shows your kid's not doing what they're supposed to, how do you even address that with your child? You can't. It's like you can't. It's like punishing a child for something they did 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Well, how many typically developing children are going to remember that, let alone people who have disabilities? So I think that we as parents,
communication log actually comes into play.
What that?
That communication log.
Absolutely.
I think that comes into play and is very important to the parents, so that you find out what's happening throughout the day. Because like Brian said, you don't want to come, 3 months and you're sitting down talking about things and you've been finding out that there's been a problem.
Right.
And, there's no communication to you. So again, if you don't have a communication log written into your IEP, that you should get that at the end of the day,
right.
then they're not going to provide you the communication that, hey, there's a behavior that's happening, especially if it's not something that's very aggressive, but, hey, they just don't want to do their work. You're
Right.
going to talk and think everything is all peachy keen, and then you're going to come to this meeting and they're going to, the state I want you.
They're going to say, hey, your kid's not been doing any work.
And you're like, well, when did you want to tell me that? So if you don't have a communication log written into your IEP, because we know that if it's not written in the IEP, it's never going to happen, because the IEP is a legal document. Yeah. But I suggest that you guys get that written in if you don't, because that is truly going to be the way of your communication between the school and yourself.
Right. And so let's imagine you sit down for that next IEP meeting and they have all this data that you don't have access to if you don't have a daily communication log or some sort of data that you have access to. Really, Marla, your parent participation rights are being denied because you are an equal member of that team. Every one of you, parents, are equal members of that team, and you should have access to the same data as everyone else in order to make good and right decisions for your child. Right. And so you should be able to have access to the same data as everyone else when it comes to behavior as well.
That's correct. So, Brian, we have 8 minutes left. Yep. And I have one more question that I think is important, because when an FBA is done, it's usually done by the school personnel. So right. If you come back together, the question is, what is your opinion if parents feel that they don't agree with the results of the FBA from the school? Can they request an outside evaluation, and who pays for that?
That's a great question as well, because yes, parents have the right to request an external evaluation or an independent evaluation, I guess, if they disagree with the results of the school's evaluation. And that would be the case with an FBA as well. And so you would, I would do everything in writing, just because, I don't ever want to play the he said, she said game.
Exactly.
But I would put it in writing and say, we are requesting an independent evaluation. We disagree with these results. The school district should provide you a list of, possible evaluators. Right. You do not have to use those evaluators. You can choose your own, but they should provide you with a list of people who could do that service. And at this point, the school district would have to pay for that. Now, I'm not an attorney, so any attorneys out there, please correct me if I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. There can be, so parents be aware, if you end up in due process or you end up in mediation, things like that, there can be times where you might actually end up on the hook for that evaluation.
Right.
Generally speaking, though, the school district would have to provide or would have to pay for that evaluation. Now, there are some times where that might not be the case, and we actually have a link that I think will explain that better. We can share with you in a little bit. So I hope that answers your question, Marla.
Yeah. So that's it for the questions right now.
Yeah. Well, very good. So one last thing, I just want to make sure that I communicate, that, when we're thinking about behavior, we also have to consider that there are 20-ish other kids in the classroom. And it is important that they also receive an education. And so if your child is engaging in behavior that is hindering his or her education or the education of others, a plan needs to be created so that everyone gets that education. Now, don't misunderstand me. IDEA does not cover kids without disabilities, but it does kind of look out for them a little bit. Now, with that FBA and the behavior improvement plan, if a district tries it once and says, oh, it didn't work, we're done, there's nothing in the law that says how often it should happen. But I think it's important to make sure you give it a good faith effort and you work really hard with your team to try to find the strategies that are going to work for your child in the placement that they're currently in. Because behavior is one of those areas that change of placement can happen, because we do have to look out for the other kids too. Right. So that's just an important thing to think about. But, as a parent advocate, or advocating for your child, you need to make sure that you say, hey, this didn't work. Let's try some other things. Let's look at what some of the research might say about people with Down syndrome and behavior, and let's put those things in place and give that a try. And don't give up after the first or second time. Keep pushing, because I know for you, Marla, I know for me, that our boys, they can be successful when given the right supports.
Absolutely. And that's the whole point of the show, is that, when given the proper supports, they can be successful in that. Although, we don't know exactly what's going on, that ABC, that antecedent, those communications are those behaviors are communications, and we really need to be respectful of what our kids are saying. And so that's why it is really important to find out get that data, and then create a BIP that is done with fidelity, is, you guys are talking about it, that it's not like, hey, let's come back at the end of the year kind of report.
Right.
It's a fluid document that you guys are working, because it's going to change. I mean, hopefully with these supports in place, those behaviors are going to decrease.
Right. And you may even see other behaviors increase, I know, Marla, when we were prepping for the show, I talked about, biting your fingernails. Yeah. If any of you are fingernail biters, and you stop doing that, you have to replace that behavior with something. And so people will often use their breath mints or their chewing gum or something, suckers or something like that. Same thing with our kids, that when we stop the behavior, we have to give them some other way to communicate what it is that they're wanting to communicate. And it could be situational, where a new situation arises, like the gym. You may not have expected that with Jacob, right. But that is something that's causing him to not want to go into the school building. Right. So having to work with your team, not against your team, in order to try to figure that out is beneficial for everybody, honestly.
Right. So, Brian, thank you. I think that was an awesome show. I think we gave a lot of information. And if you are watching this on the replay, if you do have any questions, please put them in the comments, because, again, we can still see these comments. You can still share the video as well. And just to end the show, we are accepting guest speakers on our show. We do have a few lined up for the beginning of 2019. But we are accepting new speakers, and we are also asking for or accepting sponsorships of our show. If you're interested in sponsoring our show, we will provide our email link in the comments below. And I think we want to say one more thing about our next guest speaker, because she'll be
So, I echo what Marla said. We're glad that you joined us today. We are very passionate about what we're doing, and we like sharing it with you and sharing our knowledge. And we'll share, like she said, we'll share the resources with you on our page. We do have a show coming up in mid-November. I know this is technically our October show. It's November 1st. But we do have a show coming up in mid-November, where we are going to welcome my friend Courtney Hansen. She is the mother of twins, one who has Down syndrome, and she's also an advocate. She's gone through specialized training for that. She's a blogger. I think it's the Inclusion Revolution is her blog, and she's also currently navigating the world of special education with moving to another state. So I think she's going to have a lot to offer us, Marla. Yeah, I think she's going to have a lot to offer. So I think that show is scheduled for November 15th. So stay tuned for that. I know you'll want to be able to touch. The time will be a little different, because Courtney lives on the Pacific Coast. So we don't want her having to roll out of bed first thing in the morning to jump on a show. So stay tuned for the time. I think it'll be about an hour later or so.
Yes.
But that's the plan, that we're going to have Courtney on.
Easter.
What's that?
1 p.m. Eastern.
Yes, I think that's right. Yep. And that way, Courtney can get her kids dropped off and be ready to go. And you won't want to miss that. I think Courtney will be a great guest to have on our show. And I hope a lot of parents will be able to connect with her on what she's doing and how she's navigating this world.
Right. Yep. Okay, Brian. Well, that's the end of our show. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. And don't forget that our other two shows, our first two shows, are available on our Facebook page. So have an awesome day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Don't forget to share our show. If you know family members or friends, or you have a community organization that you think would benefit from this, please feel free to share our show with them, because we want this information to get out there so parents feel like they can have a voice at the table with everyone else.
Absolutely.
All right, Marla, good to see you again.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.